我宣布，中俄海上联合2022。
The year 2027 holds great significance for President Xi.
万岁!
It will be the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. It could also see him re-elected to an unprecedented fourth term as leader.
Is Taiwan ready for war?
Well, I do not think that we are ready for war right now, but definitely we are about to be ready for war.
Dr. Lei Chung is the director of Taiwan's Department of Chinese Affairs. He says the government is workshopping all possible plans by Beijing.
We are talking about the Chinese, the Air Force, as also the blockade by the sea. Those are the things that are very possible employed by China to cut off Taiwan from our fuel, our energy, and also the food resources and all those. Despite that, we are preparing for the stockpile to meet the situation like those.
And you're preparing for that now?
Yeah, we have to prepare for everything.
From their fighter jets at the Hsinchu Air Base to their warships at sea. It appears that Taiwan is preparing for the worst. And make no mistake, they'll be coming up against the biggest military force in the world.
The Chinese PLA has 975,000 troops at its disposal. Taiwan's got roughly 90,000, give or take, is that right?
We have 150,000 military personnel.
150,000. As opposed to 1 million, though.
Opposed to 1 million, yes.
Just a fraction.
If you look at the sheer number, of course, that is a contrast. But for the Chinese to be able to transport their military personnel over the Taiwan Strait, and the ships crossing the water can be a target.
Even after all of that, if Xi's forces manage to get on the ground here, what comes next is arguably the hardest part: urban warfare. Taiwan is one of the most densely populated parts of the world where street fights would have to take place through these narrow alleyways and built-up neighbourhoods. And if history's taught us anything, victory is anything but assured.
If it comes down to urban warfare, how long realistically could you hold them off?
We don't try to calculate how long we can last. The determination is that we will fight as long as it takes.
What sort of help will you need?
The need will be for us to continue to stockpile the ammunitions and weapons that we need for Taiwan self-defense, and we have been doing that right now.
Do you have concerns that American weapons at the moment are going to Ukraine, leaving you short perhaps?
We have seen reports on that, but we are engaging in very serious discussions with the U.S. side to make sure that the weapons are in steady supply to Taiwan.
I do not think there's any imminent attempt on the part of China to invade Taiwan.
At the G20 meeting in Indonesia, Joe Biden met with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping.
I didn't find him more confrontational or more conciliatory. I found him the way he's always been, direct and straightforward.
But 3 months earlier, the US president was just as direct when questioned about Taiwan in a prime-time interview in America.
Would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion?
Yes.
Well, President Biden has made very clear that the United States would in fact move to defend Taiwan and deploy our military forces into Taiwan in order to protect them. I think that pretty much makes clear that the United States will in fact go to war if necessary in order to protect Taiwan.
Which brings us to a critical point for Australia. Where do we stand if the US ends up with a war on its hands over Taiwan?
If the US goes in, do we then have to?
I think it would be extraordinarily difficult for Australia not to. I mean, the United States has invested decades in this relationship. Australian geography alone makes us a really critical partner to the United States in any Taiwanese contingency, because it is almost impossible to conceive that such a conflict would be restricted to Taiwan.
If China takes Taiwan, do we have to go in?
That's a question for the government of the day. Of course, we have alliance obligations with the United States. We don't have a closer security partner than the United States. We fought and bled together over the last century.
We face very complex strategic circumstances, and the world is much more fragile now than it has been for a long time. That is the reality of the world in which we are living, and we are seeing a great power contest.
And from a man who had seen his fair share of military action, joining forces with America will come at a cost.
The most basic expectation is that we share the burden, and the biggest burden is casualties. If you're going to fight beside the Americans, you will take casualties. So whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan or in a future Taiwan scenario, there will be significant casualties. And they know who their allies are that are prepared to really stand shoulder to shoulder with them. And that's the key thing.